Good morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome to the final session of the Omni Risk Return Industry Workshop, Round 2. My name is Atula Mpanje. I'm a Communications Officer at the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, and I'll be guiding us through today's session as we wrap up our journey through the return, focusing on sections 9 to 12. So, over the past few weeks, we've unpacked the different components of the return. Together with your active engagement and thoughtful questions, your participation has not only helped clarify the return, it also just helped shape it. So, if you've just joined us today, welcome. And if you've been with us through the earlier workshops, thank you. The recordings of the previous round are already on our FSCA YouTube page, but the recordings for this round, so first, second, and this one, which is the third, will be available on our YouTube page by the end of day. As always, we encourage open engagement. This is your space as much as it is ours. Now, I'm not alone. I'm joined by some of my colleagues who are part of the Omni Risk Return team. I'm going to ask that you have your cameras on. We've got Lorraine van Deventer, who will start us with the presentation, and she'll be joined by Juanita Smith. Cameras on, please, colleagues, so people can see you. And then we've got Marilee Victor, who'll be doing the opening remarks. And then we've got Akashin Rampasad, who's also helping us with tech. So if you want to put up your hand and you want to ask questions during the Q&A session, Akashin is the one that will enable your mic. Okay. Colleagues, I am going to ask that Marilee comes through for the opening remarks. So we'll have Marilee who'll start with opening remarks, and then we'll have Lorraine and Juanita Smith who will speak. And after that, we'll have the Q&A session. So while Lorraine is speaking, if you have any questions, please write them down and we will address them during the Q&A session. We do ask that you post all questions on the Q&A tab at the top of your screen and not on the chat because sometimes it does get lost. Thank you very much. Without further ado, Marilee Victor.
Good morning, everyone. As Atuli said, thank you for joining. This is the last one of our second round of workshops. So if you've joined the previous two workshops, you would know the following remarks off by heart. But we do still find that we have new participants joining, so I'm going to run through this quite quickly. As we said before, Lorraine is going to explain all the risks that we're trying to address with the questions in the Omni Risk Return. So it is very important that you focus on the contents of the return, the way in which we ask the questions. If you understand the risk that we're trying to address, you may see that there's a question that we could potentially pose in a different way to obtain the information that we need. And you're welcome to make suggestions on the comments document for us to consider that as well. This document will only work if we work with industry to collaborate with us and to understand what the challenges are within industry. Very important, this is one tool that we use to supervise our entities. It's a baseline risk rating tool, but obviously we have various other methods in which we engage with our entities to make sure that we understand what it is that they do. Also, if this baseline risk rating tool does indicate some sort of a risk that comes up as high, this will only prompt us to have a discussion with the specific entity, and it doesn't mean we're storming in guns blazing. It really is so that we are having the discussions and that we collaborate more and work with our industry and have the relevant discussions and have a better relationship with the entities we supervise. The Omni Risk Return replaced the Omni CBR. So if you are aware and you remember the Omni CBR that we published about 2-3 years ago, this is a very condensed version of that. We did listen to all the comments that came in, and we made sure that we realized in terms of costs, in terms of time, we did need to make some changes that, and in line with the strategy of the FSCA and the new IRS project, which is our SUPTEC system that we're rolling out, we needed to make some changes, and therefore we are now with the Omni Risk Return only. I must, however, mention if you are already submitting some returns, maybe financial, it may be the conduct of business return applicable to the insurers, you will still continue submitting those returns for now. They are different from the Omni risk return, and we are going through a process of streamlining and making sure that there is no duplication and that the returns are different and that they contain different questions which we will need to supervise. If you think there's a question that we can ask differently, please suggest that. We have had some comments before saying that some information the entities aren't getting at this point. I must say that we did go through an exercise of really making sure that these are the very basic risks that we want addressed. And for that reason, we do think the information that we are requesting is very necessary. But you're welcome to comment in the document for us if you think that it's something that you can't get or it's something that you shouldn't be getting. And we'll have a look at that. But also, if you are not getting something at this point, we will allow for a phasing period, in terms of reporting to assist entities to have the time to obtain information that they may not be having at this point. Also note that we will not leave you here after these webinars. It's very important that we look at every sector and identify what the specific requirements are in terms of guiding the different sectors to get to a point where you can successfully complete these returns. Some sectors may be low risk. We are aware of that. And those are some things that we will specifically look at when we go into the piloting phase of this project. There's also a very specific focus on the smaller entities that have we've seen they have a lot of questions in terms of how to report on this return, what questions will be relevant, what questions won't. So we will customize our engagements going forward in the next year with the entities to make sure that we guide you and give you the required attention and need that you need to be able to complete this document. Very important, please put up your hand to take part in the pilot. We're not entirely sure how we're going to roll that out yet, but very important, we need entities of all sizes, business models, types to be able to help us to test this document and to see that it really works, even in terms of the methods of submission. It is very important that everybody do go through the trouble of reading and watching all the documents and informations that we publish. We are putting those on a specific platform. I think Unita's going to address that a bit later on. But we ask that this document really be used going forward as something for you to manage your business. I know it doesn't seem like it at this point. It seems like just another requirement from the regulator to report. But the aim is that it is a proactive tool where you can see certain items popping up early on, and you can maybe have a look at that before it becomes a big problem. So with that, I hand over to Atule. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Marilee. I'm pretty sure a lot of people know that opening remark by heart now. If you haven't figured it out yet, you haven't been listening. We're going to ask that Lorraine van Deventer comes through, and then Lorraine, you may hand over to Juanita.
Thank you, Atuli. Just get my slides in order. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for making the time to join us today. It's really great to see so many of you attending, especially because it's the second round. So we really appreciate your participation in this project. So I'm going to take you through the sections of the Omni risk return the last 4 sections of the Omni risk return. So let me just start with this slide. So for those of you who have attended the previous sections, you will recognize it. So apologies for the repeat, but like we mentioned before, we are repeating some of the information just in case there are new people joining that hasn't joined any of the other sessions. So in the first session, we walked through sections 1 to 4. In the second session, we will discuss sections 5 to 8. that looks at how institutions handle transactions, products, and communication with their customers. And during this section, we will focus on 9 to 12, which are highlighted there in red. These last 4 sections really shift the focus from market-facing conduct to the institution's internal operations and their financial resilience. So how well you manage complaints, safeguards information, maintain adequate resources, and sustain your financial position. This is also a good time to remind everyone that the data that we collect in this return serves multiple supervisory purposes. And like we mentioned before, each data point can influence several parts of our risk model simultaneously, and its interpretation is not always one-directional. So, for example, a high number of complaints may raise conduct risk, but if it's managed effectively, it can also reflect very strong monitoring and remedial processes. So, context is really does matter. So, but depending on the circumstances, the same indicator might either increase or decrease an institution's risk score. So, please keep that in mind. So if we start today with section 9, so this section tells us quite a bit about how institutions deal with customer dissatisfaction. So that's from how many complaints come in to how they are resolved and whether any issues end up going all the way to the ombud. We start with complaints volume. Here we are asking you to provide the total number of complaints received during the reporting period. And this just gives us a sense of the overall scale of customer dissatisfaction. So if complaint numbers are high compared to the size of your customer base, that can point to some deeper issues. So, for example, things like poor disclosure, product weaknesses, or just service gaps in your service deliveries. In section 9.2, we look at complaints resolution, and that is how many complaints are resolved and how many remain outstanding. So if a lot of complaints stay open for a long time, it could suggest that the complaints handling process needs strengthening, or that there's not enough capacity in your institution to deal with complaints properly. The next section deals with resolution turnover times. And here we request you to provide the number of complaints resolved during the reporting period, categorized by the turnover time intervals listed in options A to D. And this information really just tells us how efficiently customer issues are being addressed. In other words, how quickly do you respond when a customer raises an issue? So here, long delays often mean internal bottlenecks or unclear escalation lines, and that can really frustrate customers and delay fair outcomes. In section 9.4, we look at ombud complaints. Here, the institution are asked to report 3 things: the number of complaints lodged with an ombud against them, the number of cases where the ombud ruled in favor of the customer, and the number of matters resolved in the customer's favor before a formal ruling was made. So this information just helps us understand how often customers feel they need to go beyond the institution's own compliance process to get resolution, and then how those internal cases are ultimately decided. So if we see a high number of ombud complaints, especially where the outcome favors the customer, it usually signals underlying weaknesses in the institution's internal complaints handling process, or the escalation practice, or even their broader culture of accountability. And it tells us that issues which should have been fixed internally are instead being settled externally. So, and this is a clear indicator that something in the process isn't working as it should. So, like I said, overall, the information that we request in this section will help us understand not just the volume of the complaints, but also how well you engage with your customers and resolve their concerns, and where there might be early warning signs of conduct or governance issues, especially in your compliance handling process. So moving to section 10, and this section looks at how institutions manage their technology and their information risks, essentially how well you safeguard your systems, your customer data, and your overall operational integrity. Starting with the first question, dealing with IT governance findings. Here we are asking institutions to tell us how many material findings were identified in your most recent IT governance audits or control assessment reviews, and how many of those were repeat findings from previous assessments. We clarify by what we mean, let me just see, yeah. We clarify by what we mean by material findings. It is defined to refer to significant issues or deficiencies identified during an audit that could affect how effectively the institution manages IT risk or achieves its strategic goals. So these are not your minor housekeeping issues. They are findings with real potential impact on your operations or cyber security or your compliance. Repeat findings, we've also provided you with a definition of what we mean by that, and that's for purposes of this return only. Here we said that repeat findings are issues that were identified in previous audits or assessments that you've conducted, but have now reappeared because they were either not resolved or they were not addressed properly. So they often point to weaknesses in your control environment or in how you follow through on a remediation. So when we see high numbers here, it signals that problems are persisting rather than being fixed. So the purpose of this data is to help us assess how robust your IT governance and your internal control environment really is. So if there are lots of material or repeat findings, it may suggest gaps in your oversight or it may point to ineffective risk management or weak accountability for follow-up actions. The second question focuses on the accuracy and completeness of your customer-related records. A very important aspect for us, especially from a conduct perspective. So here we are asking you two things. So the number of customer records that you've assessed as accurate and complete according to your data quality standards, and the total number of customer-related records that you maintain. So what do we mean by data quality standards? These are the benchmarks or the criteria that you have set internally to make sure that your customer data is reliable. In other words, that it is complete, accurate, up to date, and that it's fit for purpose. So we're not, and I think importantly so, we're not prescribing what these standards should be or how you should set these criteria. Instead, what we want to see is that you have them, that you've defined it, and that you are actually testing your data against them. So overall, for us, this section helps to gauge two things. Firstly, how strong your IT governance and control environment really is, and how much we can trust the accuracy of your customer data. So this is about the systems that protect information and the quality of the information itself. And this is also information that should be valuable to you because strong IT governance and good data quality aren't just compliance indicators. It is actually quite essential for operational resilience and good business conduct. I think It's also important to mention that the goal here is not to burden smaller institutions. We do recognize that there will naturally be differences between large and small entities, not only in the scope of the IT governance frameworks, but also in the nature and the depth of the audits or the assessments that they conduct. What matters here is that every institution, regardless of size, that you manage your IT and data risk in a way that is appropriate to your scale and complexity. But that said, and as Marjorie mentioned during the opening remarks, we do understand that smaller institutions may need additional guidance, and we will consider how best to provide that support going forward. So this part of Section 10 looks at how financial institutions are adopting new and emerging technologies and how that affects the operational and risk environment. So we are asking information on 5 key areas. First, we look at cloud infrastructure. So that's whether the institution is fully cloud-based, whether it's hybrid or still operating entirely on premises. And it just helps us understand the level of dependency on external service providers and any potential concentration or data security risks. So cloud solutions bring flexibility and scalability, and in a lot of instances, it may be more cost effective. But if they are not properly governed, they may also introduce additional vulnerability that we need to take into consideration. We then also look at your use of data analytics and application of artificial intelligence and the extent to which these tools are being used. And we've mentioned before that AI and these data analytics can really strengthen your decision making and your efficiency. And that's one of the reasons why the FSCA is adopting a new SIPTEC tool. But again, if not well managed, they can also create risks. So for example, especially if you look at data analytics and predictive analytics, it could create algorithmic biases and even over-reliance on some automated models. Thirdly, we also ask about about blockchain technology, whether it is in wide use, being piloted or not in use at all. And this just helps us monitor adoption trends in these distributed ledger types of technologies and assess what additional risk it poses to your specific risk profile. We then also consider other emerging technologies. So this allows us just to capture innovations that does not fit into any one of the categories that we've listed above. And then finally, we ask about the number of systems that you use across products and services, whether they're integrated, standalone, or whether they're fragmented. And this matters because operational complexity often correlates with higher risks. So if you have multiple unlinked systems, it can make it quite harder to maintain data consistency or respond to incidents or to ensure effective oversight. So the purpose here in requesting this data is really twofold. Apologies for that. It is to understand how far institutions have moved in adopting your technologies and to identify any risk associated with the adoption of those technologies that might arise. Section 10.4 focus on system availability. Essentially, that is how resilient your systems are and how well they handle any disruptions, because they will always be. It's unavoidable. So we are asking institutions to provide information here on 2 key aspects. So that's the first one is the frequency of downtime incidents broken down by quarters, and then the overall duration of those incidents. You will notice we distinguish between planned and unplanned downtime. So planned downtime, that is something that's expected. You've planned for it. So that reflects scheduled maintenance, upgrades, or testing. And then your unplanned downtime, this signals potential weakness. This could signal potential weaknesses in your IT environment, and these may result from system failures, cyber incidents, or ineffective control processes. So the frequency data tells us how often interruptions occur, while the duration data tells us how long it takes to recover. So taken then together, these measures give us a sense of how resilient your systems are and how well they can maintain business continuity when something goes wrong. So the purpose really is to assess your operational resilience and to see where the systems are stable, that interruptions are managed effectively, and that services to customers remains consistent and reliable. The last two questions of Section 10 focuses on data protection and cybersecurity. In 10.5, we are asking for information on two things: the number of incidents involving unauthorized access, disclosure, or loss of customer data, and the number of customer records that were exposed or that were compromised during that breach. In 10.6, we look at the impact of those breaches. In other words, how many individual customers were actually affected during the reporting period. So the purpose here is twofold. So firstly, we assess the strength of your information security controls that you've put in place. A high number of breaches or repeated breaches is a strong indicator of weak cybersecurity, or poor monitoring, or insufficient staff awareness, and which all creates or increases your conduct risks. And then secondly, we want to measure the extent of the impact. So sometimes it's not necessarily the number of incidents that matters most, but how many customers are affected. So even one breach could have major implications if it exposes sensitive data belonging to thousands of customers. So from a supervisory perspective, the information that we're collecting here will help us identify institutions with recurring vulnerabilities or poor containment practices, and it also supports our broader work on data protection and operational resilience. So this section is not just about numbers. It's really about understanding how well institutions protect their customer information, how well they respond to breaches and prevent recurrence. So the goal here is to make sure that when something goes wrong, and like I said, it inevitably will, the impact on customers is minimized. And the lessons that we've learned from that is then implemented into your overall practices. So moving on to section 11. So this section basically takes us into the people and capacity side of things, because even the best frameworks and the systems can fail if there aren't enough capable people to run them. So that's why in section 11.1, we're looking at vacancies. So here we ask for the total number of vacant positions and the total number of full-time positions across the organization. And this just helps us assess resourcing adequacy. So in other words, where an institution has, whether the institution has staffing capacity to carry out its responsibility. We ask for the total number of vacancies across the whole institution, and not only those dealing with regulated matters, because organizational capacity doesn't operate in isolation. So even if vacancies sit outside of your core financial services areas, they can still have an indirect but significant impact on your governance or on your operations and on your ultimately your customer outcomes. So if I could use an example, let's say shortages in HR or IT, for example, can delay recruitment, training, or even system maintenance. And this could ultimately affect how financial services are delivered. And I think this broader view also helps us identify whether resource constraints are systemic rather than confined to one business unit. The next section deals with training, and the question focus on how much the institution's training expenditure is directed specifically toward conduct-related topics compared to the total staff expense budget. So this tells us about the institution's commitment to building a strong conduct culture. So if we see consistent investment in staff development, especially around ethics, fair treatment, and compliance, it is a good sign that the institution is embedding the right behaviors and priorities internally. I think we are at the last part. Yes, so this last part of section 11, it focuses on outsourcing, and we ask institutions to identify which activities were outsourced during the reporting period. And here you have to select all that applies. It's broken down into different categories. So we look at corporate functions. So that would be things like HR, finance, legal, treasury management, and IT. Then we also look at control functions. So that's your risk compliance, internal audit function, and actuarial function. We look at administration, and this covers both general administrative activities that don't require VCA authorizations, and those that do. So that's such as services linked to license activities. And then we also have a specialized activities here, specific matters such as binder functions, asset management, or collection services, where that's managed on behalf or where those activities are outsourced to a third party. We also give you an option to select no activity was outsourced, and if that actually applies to your institution. So the purpose here is to help us understand the extent to which your outsourced activities, but more importantly, how much reliance you place on third parties to deliver key services. And like anything in life, there's a good and a bad, and the same applies to outsourcing. It can be good in that it can improve efficiency, give access to specialized skills, and even reduce costs. But when it involves core critical functions, it can also introduce additional risks, especially if oversight is weak or if the third party operates outside of South Africa. So when completing this section, think carefully about both formal and informal arrangements. So not only where a third party performs the entire function as well, but also where part of a process or activity is handled externally. You need to reflect it here. Then moving to the last section on financial data. And the information we collect here focus on the financial position of the institution. In 12.1, you are required to break down total turnover between financial services related business and non-financial services related business, both globally and for your South African operations. And this information just helps us understand the scale of your operations, where your revenue is coming from, and how much of it is tied directly to regulated financial activities. A higher proportion of turnover from non-financial activities could signal competing strategic priorities that may affect your focus on conduct-related matters, and therefore that may increase your overall risk profile. We are also asking for turnover projections for the current year, which allows us to see whether your growth expectations are conservative or whether it's aggressive, and then also whether there are big gaps between actual and forecast figures. because that in itself can give us an indication of risk. Section 12.2 look at your expenditure. Here we simply ask for the total annual expenditure from your latest financial statements, and we use this to assess how much of your income is absorbed by operational cost. So if expenditure is rising faster than turnover, it could point to emerging financial vulnerabilities or sustainability concerns. This part of Section 12 looks at the funding structure of the institution, especially how you are financed and how sustainable your funding sources are. So starting with the question in paragraph A, here we look at your gearing ratio. So this measures the level of debt relative to your equity. So for financial institutions, this gives us a view of leverage. Obviously, the higher the ratio, the greater the risk that your debt obligations could create solvency pressures. If any market or operational conditions changes. So for retirement funds, the same concept applies, but it's measured as assets versus liabilities instead. So when you're selecting an option here, think about what your latest financial statements show in terms of capital structure and your balance sheet strength. The question in B asks about funding concentration. So here specifically, whether the top 3 contributors make up more than 40% of your total funding. And this just helps us identify whether the institution is over-reliant on a small number of contributors. So if it just comes from a large portion comes from 1 or 2 contributors, if anything goes wrong or any one of them withdraws or reduces their support, it could have a significant impact on your business. And then you also require you to indicate if you don't operate, where you operate without the need or support of external funding, you are also required to reflect that in the return. So finally, the question in paragraph C asks you to identify the primary source of funding. So whether it's investors or shareholders, lenders, or other forms such as donor funding or group level funding. And this just gives us insight into your financial resilience and flexibility. Because institutions funded primarily by equity or internal reserves may be better positioned, for example, to absorb shocks than those heavily reliant on debt or concentrated external support. Here we try to understand what is the relationship between an institution and its broader group, especially in terms of financial reliance and contribution within that group structure. So in 12.4, we ask for the proportion of total funding that the institution received from its group or parent or any of its group entities. And you'll have to select one of the applicable options. This just helps us to measure the degree of reliance on intergroup financial support. Also, a high level of group-based funding can be a red flag for interconnectedness risk. It also tells us how dependent the institution is on group liquidity and capital flows rather than on its own financial strength. If intergroup funding is present, the follow-up question asks about the nature of that support. In other words, whether it's in the form of loans, capital injections, guarantees, or other arrangements. The next part deals with organizational group turnover. And here we look at the financial contribution of the institution within its wider group. So here you ask to report on the group's annual turnover from financial services activities and the group's total income across all business areas. And this comparison just helps us to contextualize where the financial institution that's completing the return sits within its group. Sits within the group. So if the financial services portion is very small compared to the total group income, That may raise concerns that the regulated activities are not a core focus of the group, and that in turn can influence how much attention or resources and oversight the group dedicates to governance, risk management, and compliance in its financial financial entities. I think, yep, that's the end of it. So this brings us to the end of sections 9 to 12. So all of the data that we are requesting in the return really helps us build a more complete picture of your institution's risk profile. And like Marilee indicated earlier, the idea isn't to make your lives harder with extra reporting, but to help both you and us to better understand the risk and the strengths across the sector. So thank you very much for listening to me. I know it's a lot of information to take in, but hopefully it's a little clearer now how every section links back to the bigger supervisory picture. So thank you, Chair. I am handing the mic back to you and Juanita.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. Juanita, you may come through with timelines.
Thank you, Chair. And good morning, everyone. Welcome to your last session. I'm the last person to say welcome. I think my slide is actually the one that everyone would know best by now, but I have seen a question or two regarding timelines, which I'll hope to address in this slide for you. So if we look at the slide, the first part is about the Omni risk return and the consultation process we're following. So you would know by now, you're in the last session of the second round of workshops that we're having about the return, trying to answer as many questions as we can and clear up as much uncertainty as we can before the comments are due, which is at the end of November. All comments must be on the Microsoft template. We will not be receiving any comments in the inbox or on a Word document or on any other email or form of communication. The reason for this is to make it easier and faster for us to consolidate the comments, analyze them, and address them, because we are in tight timelines because of this project falling into the bigger IRS project for the FSCA. So we gave industry 2 months to comment on the document. If there are any questions that we haven't addressed in any of the workshops, and that is why we make the recordings of all the workshops available to you on all social media platforms, then you're welcome. And there's still some uncertainty or you feel there should be a description for any of the terms, you are welcome to highlight that for us in your comments that you submit by the end of November. We will be working through the comments in December and January. Now, if we look at the overall IRS implementation plan, and I say this in every session, but the IRS is the biggest project the FSCA has ever undertaken. And the return and the risk model is very central to the IRS. Now, the IRS is our super tech solution that we as the FSCA has bought and is busy implementing and changing to make it work for us as a South African regulator for the South African market. If we look at the first phase, there's 3 phases to IRS and the implementation of IRS. The first one was developing the existing returns. Those are the statutory returns that Marie referred to that you are already submitting, developing them on the system. This includes the insurance CBRs, as well as all other financial reporting and irregularity reporting and all of that you've been doing to the regulator. So those returns were developed in phase 1 on the system. It's important to note that in future, we will not be accepting any Word documents or PDF. There might be uploads for evidence that we ask on the system so that we can refer back to them. But all forms and returns will be completed either by submitting them XML, those are for the returns like the risk return, or by actually completing them on the portal on our website and then submitting them. Now, to answer some of the questions, yes, you can complete and save and complete and save and then only submit once done. It will allow you to do that. So you don't have to do everything at one stage. You will be allowed to have more than one user authorized for your entity to complete and upload documents. So this is the returns that were done in phase one. Currently, what we've done is we're working through the returns and seeing how we can possibly consolidate some of the returns, streamline them, make it easier to complete, and that is a process that we're currently busy with. While phase two is underway. In phase two, we have the risk model and the risk return. Now, the risk return is this Omni risk return that we're consulting with you on, and the risk model is the model in the background for all entities, and that's why you're also completing the risk model on entity level. So it's for all the entities, and the risk model is one of the tools that we use to risk rate you, as well as all of the other information that we receive from you and the notifications that we'll receive in future from you. So in phase two, where we are now, we did our first testing of the model and the return, and we're actually starting this week with our second round of testing in this regard. While busy with this testing, we also want to start with a pilot project for the risk return after consultation process. So this is early in 2026. We welcome, like Marley said, all volunteers from all sectors to please send us a mail to the designated inbox to volunteer yourself as a participant in the pilot. We would like to have representation from all sectors and small and bigger entities to also test all ways of submission and how easy it is to use. As you can see on the slide, there's a whole process with the pilot. There is info sharing, there's training, and then only the pilot testing. And that ends at the end of August next year. And I think that's why some people think that the first submissions of the return will be in September or December next year. This is, however, not the case. We have not said when the first submission should be, and it's highly unlikely that it will be already at the end of next year, because in this pilot process, we have to refine the process, and we can't ask for returns until we can't go live with the system, because we need the system to be able to automate the whole process around the returns to enable us to be more proactive as a regulator and to analyze it much better. And now it's not only a return for a certain sector or it will be coming in at a certain time, it is a return for all the entities that we regulate. And that's why a lot of thinking around that needs to go in, and that's also why we need a system. Maybe to answer then some of the questions we had in the other workshops, we don't know what the reporting period will be yet, whether it will be linked to a financial year end or whether it will be linked to a calendar year end. And we would appreciate comments in that regard, where you could highlight how it would work for you, what would be the best option considering other reporting that you do. Okay, we do know that when we start implementing it, it will be on an annual basis. And then in future, as some of my colleagues have highlighted before, we might change it for certain sectors to do it more regularly, or see if we can do it in a best attempt phase for a longer period. We'll walk that road with you. This is just the first step in consultation. Then there's a phase 3 to the IRS project, and this is where we're working on licensing, enforcing, and building the corporate profile of each entity. This is where all the forms, application forms, notifications, all of that is built onto the system, also tested, and we can't go live until all of that has not been done. And that is phase 3, which still needs to start in full swing. We've done some initial work on it. As you can see there, we started in June this year. We've started working on some of the forms and building it in, but there's also a process for streamlining it and testing it. So hopefully that addresses most of your concerns and also highlights what we need from you in terms of volunteering for the pilot and by when the first returns will be due. Thank you. I'm handing back to you, Atuli.
Thank you very much, Juanita. We are now moving to the Q&A section. of today's workshop. We'll take questions in batches. So first we'll take 3 raised hands. So I do ask that you raise your hand and a caution will enable your mic. After those are answered, we'll then move to 3 questions from the Q&A section. We'll repeat this process as long as time allows. I do encourage you to raise your hand and ask questions directly. We would love for this to be a dialogue and not just a presentation from our end. Your input really matters. So let's have a look. Who has raised their hand? Please raise your hand, please. Okay, I've got 2. Asking for a third person, please, and then we'll begin. Okay, let's address the first 2. Maybe it will inspire someone to raise their hand. Let's start with Evelyn. Evelyn, please come through. Evelyn, you're on mute if you're speaking. Evelyn, can you confirm if you can hear me? Akashan has enabled your mic, but you are on mute. So you have to unmute yourself if you're speaking. Okay. While we're waiting for Evelyn to sort that out, let's go to MJ. MJ, please come through.
Thank you so much, Atuli, and morning, colleagues. And thank you for this last session. I really have to compliment the FECA on all 3 sessions. It's really been worthwhile attending and very insightful, and it gives us a better understanding of what it is that you would like to achieve. So well done on that. 2 questions, please. Under number 9.4, ombuds, complaints, and outcomes. Can I please confirm whether my understanding is correct that the ombuds that we are talking about is the National Financial Ombud, the FACE Ombud, and the Pension Funds Adjudicator? If we could just please get confirmation about whether those are the ombuds that we're talking about, falling within the sphere of the FSCA. And then my second question is around 10.1 IT governance findings. Just again want to confirm whether my understanding is correct that when we refer to audit findings, we mean internal audit findings. Thanks, Atuli.
Thank you very much, MJ. Colleagues, please come through and assist. Evelyn, I'm going to ask that you please exit and come in again. I saw your message on the chat that you're struggling. Please exit, come in again, and then raise your hand. Lorraine, you may respond.
Thank you, Atuli. So as regards the first question, whether the ombuds we're referring to are solely those ombuds within the ambit of the FECA's jurisdiction or scope of work, the answer is yes. So all ombuds that's covered by or that covers activities or complaints dealing with the FECA scope of work. I think it will also include the ombud responsible or looking at the exchanges complaints. So it's not just that list mentioned, but we can provide clarity later as regards to the ombuds we're referring to. The second question, that was section as for that 10.1. Yeah. Total number of findings reported in the most recent IT governance audit or control assessment. Yes, we specifically did not specify whether that's an internal or external audit, depending on the size of the organization. It can either be an audit conducted by an external third party, or it can be an audit that was conducted by an internal party. And it can either be done, that audit could have been done by internal audit or even the compliance team or the risk management team. So it's either an audit or a control assessment that was conducted. So it's quite wide, and that is to capture all possibilities and scenarios given the different sizes and complexities of the various organizations completing this form.
Thank you very much, Lorraine. MJ, hope that provides with clarity. Evelyn,
Actually,
yes,
apologies, it does. I just want to quickly make sure about one thing. Lorraine, sorry,
sure.
you mentioned risk control assessment. I just want us to be clear that when we talk about a risk control assessment, the purpose of a risk control assessment is not to raise findings, but to identify areas where controls could potentially already be working and we want to further strengthen it or enhance it, or to identify areas of where the control measures have to be enhanced because they're lacking. But that's not a finding. So can we just to make sure that we don't, miscommunicate here or now confuse, just for my purposes, so that I'm sure I understand, we then basically referring to internal audit, external audit, your compliance risk management function, your operational risk management function, anybody that can, in terms of your governance structure, raise a finding. So not an assessment, a finding. Thanks.
If I might come in, yes. So it depends. So if you look at the definition of material finding, and we have defined it, and I just want to quickly bring it up so that I have it in front of me, if you don't mind. Yes, so what we say in the context of IT governance audit or control assessment, because we are referring to a control assessment. So it could include a control assessment that was conducted by the risk management function. But what we say is it's in the context of those assessments or internal or audit, it refers to significant issues or deficiencies identified during the evaluation that could impact the institution's ability to manage its risk. So it's significant issues or deficiencies identified. I hope that provides the required clarity. Thank you.
It's actually confusing me a bit more, but happy we will deal with that in our comments. Thanks, Lorraine. Thanks, Atule.
Thank you, MJ. So Evelyn is still struggling with her mic. So Lorraine, please come through. I'm just going to read Evelyn's message, question that she left on the chat. Please respond. Colleagues, Marilee, Lorraine, and Juanita. Okay. The first question that Evelyn has here is, do we report breaches by unauthorized client access via Astute? That's the first question. May I address that one first?
So happy for my colleagues in the insurance sector to come in. They're more familiar with Astute than I. But for me, any breach of customer information should be reported, irrespective of where that breach occurs. If you are the institution and it's your customer data, you're responsible for protecting that data. If there's a breach of that data, then that should be included in the report. But maybe my colleagues and more familiar with the insurance sector and Astute would like to come in here.
Vanessa, I've allowed your mic. Please unmute.
Thanks, Lorraine, and good morning, colleagues. Yes, agree with the feedback that Lorraine has given. It's not so much where the breach has happened, but if it is information that you have given to a third-party service provider and it's information relating to your customer that impacts the risk to the customer, that's the information we would want to be aware of. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. And then Lorraine, Evelyn has two more questions. How and where would we indicate that we are not part of a group at all? And what does IRS stand for?
I'll come in with the last question, which is a bit easier. So it's integrated regulatory system, and in some instance solution. So I'm not 100% whether it's system or solution. There's still some uncertainty, but yes, that is the integrated regulatory system. So the first part of the question as to where they need to indicate whether they form part of the group, I think, as far as I remember, that will be covered in section 1. So in section 1, we are asking you whether you form part of a group, and then we distinguish between a financial organizational group and a non-financial organizational group. So that's in section 1 of the return.
Thank you. I hope you sorted now, Evelyn. Maybe give me a thumbs up so I know you're fine. And then we also have Erica Bruce. Erica, please come through. We've now allowed your mic.
Thank you. Sorry, I couldn't get my mic on. Thank you and good morning. And I will agree with Margriet. I must say it's the most informative sessions I've seen for a long time, with so much information that it feels like my head's going to explode. How are we going to collate it? I'm not too sure. But I think I've got a couple of questions. The first question is around section 10, and it goes to data accuracy and completeness, where you're asking for a total number of customer-related records assessed as accurate and complete. I'm not quite sure what defines a record, or how you're going to define the number of records and complete, what is accurate and complete according to financial institutions. Now, I did read the defined data quality standards, but I'm still not sure how you're defining the number of clients, the number of records through a client. So we're going to take how many clients, the number of records, then how do you define what's accurate, and the quality. So I'm a bit unsure of that. That was the one thing. And then I wanted to ask, I've seen different things across the different presentations, that some seem to be annual reporting, some seems to be quarterly reporting, then there's some other types of different reporting. How often is every section a different timing? Because if I look at from section 1 to section 9, 12, wherever we are, I think there's also seems to be a whole lot of different people and departments within a big organization that might need to report. So the question is more is, how often are each section separate? And I'm presuming that there will be multiple sign-ons or multiple different responsibilities for different departments, bearing in mind goes across IT, finance, HR. There's a huge amount of data that you're collecting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erica. Lorraine,
Thank you.
come through.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I fully understand the last question, so I'll try and answer. And happy for my colleagues to please come in. So the reporting. So firstly, the return. There will be one reporting date for the return. So and that's the full return covering all the sections. We're not going to require you to report or have different frequency of reporting in respect of the different sections within the report. Within the return, there will be one reporting period for the full return. Then within the different sections, we are asking you, so there's not, we don't ask you to provide different reporting periods. So what we might ask you is to break down the information in different quarters. But that's not the same as asking you to report for different reporting periods. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not sure I fully understood the question. So I'm happy to provide for further clarity or for any of my colleagues to come in. Then as regards the first question that deals with, apologies, now I forgot. I haven't made a note. What was
Data quality. It was data quality. How am I defining this data quality?
Yeah, so we haven't provided specific criteria, and like I said, that's really up to each institution because institutions have different information, they have different types of client records, so it's really what is appropriate for your institution. So it's for each institution to define what those data quality standards should look like. So, for example, in the FECA. We have data quality standards for our information that we have on our financial institutions. So we, for example, track empty fields, or we track, how the information is reflected, how up to date that information is, so those are the type of things that one would want to see in your data quality standards that you use as criteria. But happy to see how we can provide some further guidance on this particular topic if there is a need for that. We can definitely expand a bit more on that. So please raise this as part of your comments, and then we can consider how best to provide the guidance.
Thanks,
But I
Lorraine.
see
Yeah, I'm
many
just not
hands.
sure. I'm not sure about the number of customer related records and things, but I will raise it. And then, yes, sorry, I think I was getting confused with, so the filing is one thing, but then you asked for the quarterly breakdown. So I wasn't quite sure what the quarterly breakdown information was. So if it's not on the file return, what is this quarterly breakdown? So I think there's a bit of confusion in my mind, but I'll also just raise it to get some clarity. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Can I just also come in on the reporting frequency? I mean, that's something we've discussed quite a bit internally, right? Because I think the purpose also of these returns is we don't want information to be old. And we have said, if you only get this once a year, will this be sufficient for you to stay up to date with what's going on with an entity? Because things may change often. But also one of the things, and I think I forgot to mention this in my introductory comments, is this is still one thing that we are discussing internally, and we welcome comments on it. We have to balance this regulatory burden or this compliance burden to industry and the cost of it with the information we need and how we report on it. So it's not something that we've taken a final decision on. We're even saying maybe some entities may report more frequently, others may report annually, but this really is something we will only decide on, I think, especially after we've had the pilot to see how easy or how difficult it is. And also, we are very aware that when entities start reporting, whenever we maybe decide we're now kicking off the reporting, there will be a period where the submissions probably won't be great because entities are still going to try and find their feet around what it is that they have to submit, and some information they may have, some they may not have. So we are aware of these things. This is part of the consultation. This is part of the conversations we'll have. And I think specifically around, look, it's very important for us to understand when and how entities are communicating really important things with their customers. So if you specifically have a way in which we can potentially pose a question differently related to those very detailed statements saying, or policy wordings going out to policyholders, please feel free to make suggestions around that in the comments. It is something that we've been struggling to know exactly what would be the best way to obtain that information, specifically if you are a very big institution and you have many different types of policyholders. Thanks.
Very much. I think that was a big concern, was the frequency, and if it's a regular occurrence, then somehow how do we automate it, because there's just so much information. So it might need to be an automation of some sort, but we will comment on that. Thanks very much for clearing that up.
Thank you very much, Erica. Tia, I'm going to ask that you keep your hand raised. We're just going to go to the questions on the Q&A section, and then we'll come back to you. Juanita, I know you're ready. Please come through with the questions.
Thank you, Atule. Yes, actually, the attendees today have been very soft on us, if I can put it that way, in terms of questions in the Q&A. I have two that we need to answer. The others we have answered so far, and I just want to double check my understanding also with these answers, although I see new posts coming in as I speak. Okay, so the first one is when it comes to 9.3. 9.3 is the question about complaints and complaints resolution time, and we're asking about days, where we ask about the turnaround time. And the question is whether those days mean working days or not. I think what's important here for us to remember is we're a market conduct regulator. So for us, it is a question about how long is it for the complainant. How long is the complainant waiting for this complaint to be resolved? And for a complainant, it wouldn't be business days. It wouldn't be working days. It would be days. And that's why we didn't specify it there. But if you are of the opinion that it should be only business days, considering that this is from a market conduct perspective, please highlight that for us in your complaints. But this is also important to be accurate on how you measure the turnaround times. What is the effect on the customer? And one of the questions we got in the previous sessions when it comes to this, is it the moment that the complaint is received or the moment that maybe a bigger institution becomes aware of it? So the broker still needs to send it. And again, we're looking at it from a market conduct perspective and what is the effect on the customer. So it's from the moment you become aware of the complaint, so that meaning your broker, which is your agent, becomes aware of the complaint until it's resolved, because it's the moment the client actually complained until the complaint has been resolved for the client. And that is how we're measuring turnaround times. Marilee, do you want to add anything to that?
Thanks, Shanita. Yeah, so one thing I also want to point out is there will probably be two ways in which we use this this return, right? So for every entity that submits, the idea is that we're going to do a bit of a comparison from period to period. So your first submission will compare with the next submission to maybe see how certain indicators go up and down. Maybe you're improving on some of your turnaround times. Maybe we see a high spike in your turnaround times going up. And that's when we then can contact you and say, listen, we see there's a problem. Can we chat about it? And it may be an industry problem. It may not be something that you as an institution is doing wrong. But the other thing that we also eventually, when we get good quality submissions, we want to use this for reporting to industry as a whole, because this is going to give us quite a good data source in terms of what's happening across the financial sector in terms of market conduct risk indicators. So we can, for example, see, and we are not going to name anybody in this report. It will simply be like maybe a summary annual report. And I'm just saying maybe no final decisions have been taken, but there you maybe potentially be able to see, oh, okay, so this is the general average turnaround time for a complaint of this type of product or this nature or this type of entity size. I mean, we probably can't compare everybody across the board. We'll probably have to have certain groupings at that point. But it really is at some point to see and to provide you with information so that you can see, okay, I'm actually doing not too badly, or maybe here's something I can look at because I'm below what the industry numbers are looking like. That's also something we're planning in future. Thanks.
Thank you, Marilee. Then the next question that we have is a question that came in about, is there a definition for downtime? I then commented and said, no, we don't have a description or a definition for downtime, but why would there be a need for one? What is the possible confusion, or on which aspect do we need clarity? And the response was, Does the restarting of a system within minutes or an hour fall under downtime? In my opinion, it would not, depending on how long and if it impacts operations directly. Now, this refers to question 10.4 that we have on return 10. And again, remember that we are a market conduct regulator, and part of this is measuring not only your operational ability, but also outcomes and experiences by customers. And when we look at question 10.4, where we ask about incidents, that is specifically about system availability and incidents, and we ask about the downtime incidents. We do not define a time here, but we do say the number of system downtime incidents and the duration thereof. So we do take note that you could have a downtime and you could start the system again within minutes or within an hour, but it's still an incident and there was still downtime. And therefore, it will count as an incident and you will count it under minutes in the next column to indicate. You might have only 3 incidents in the whole reporting period, and all of them were 3 minutes. And then we can see it was minor incidents or it was quick restarts, but it's still an experience by the customer that if they came in that period, they were not able to access any of the functionalities, but we can see that it's minor. Or you could be someone that has 1 incident in the whole year, but the incident is a 48-hour incident. And then we know that you don't have regular incidents, but that there was an incident and it did take a long time to resolve. And we need to then make sure that that does not happen again, or that it was really just a one-time effect. This is also to help the supervisors in their supervisory planning, and when they have discussions with you, to have targeted discussions. And this is why we take the note of it, that you have planned and unplanned incidents, and that you have a number of incidents, and that the time of the incidents could differ, and therefore it will be different discussions. But I see Lorraine is coming in. Lorraine, you want to add?
No. I fully agree and support what you've said. So a downtime is really when your system is not available or it's not operational. So if a restart means that the system is not available, then you should report that as part of section 10. Thanks.
Thank you, Lorraine. And then we have our last question here, which I'm going to refer to Lorraine. She answered it very eloquently in one of the other sessions, and I think it links to the question that she answered about records previously. And it's to what we actually mean by customer records in 10.2, where we talk about data accuracy and completeness. Again, if you feel that this is something that we need to describe for any reason, highlight that in the comments. But Lorraine, I don't know if you want to add anything to that at this stage, since this was also mentioned in one of the other workshops, that we might need clarity here.
Yeah, so happy. I agree that we can definitely provide some further clarity. But you know, a customer record for me would be anything that relates to that details customer information, identification information. So anything relating, any record with the address or ID numbers or personal details are reflected. Any record detailing the account details, the transaction type of records, you know, those any possible record that relates to your customer. So that's like activity, transactions, and identification records would be regarded as a customer record, but we can provide some further guidance and clarity in the response document. Thanks.
Thank you, Lorraine. And now it's back to you, Atuli. We've done 3 questions.
Thank you very much, Juanita. Tia, thanks for your patience. Please come through.
No problem. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. My question is in relation to the financial data. that the FSCA requires. And not being any expert on any finances, but what I have done some research on is to find out whether accounting systems provide for the information that the FSCA requires, which is the non-financial services related to business activities. It's highly unlikely that this is readily available, and that systems would need to be developed to cater for this. And this is not a standard, reporting under the International Financial Reporting Standards. So did the fiscal consider that? And would the fiscal want to see these figures? Is it a real not negotiable? Because the cost to develop these systems will be very high if that does not fall within, those required standards.
Thank you, Tia. Would anyone like to take a stab?
So I will try, and then my colleagues can come in. So yes, so if you look at IFRS and the financial accounting practices, institutions in terms of their annual financial statements are not required to split the financial information in accordance to what we ask for in the return. But surely institutions based on their internal management accounts keep track of income or, and even expenditure relating to the financial and non-financial activities or the different types of activities within the organization. So I see, so if we were under the impression that institutions do that and that's from a good business practice perspective to see, what business unit generates the most income or where there are concerns. So maybe if you can just advise and give some clarity as to whether you are of the view that that information is currently not available at all within the institutions, and just perhaps also address it specifically in your comments, and then we can have a look at those as well. But please do not just reference the IFRS standards and the accounting practices, but rather as to the information, type of financial information that a business maintains on a monthly basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. And I think it depends on the accounting systems that companies use, and not only big banks and FSPs, but smaller companies that would buy, off-the-shelf kind of accounting systems. If that doesn't provide for it, it's going to need development, and it's going to be quite costly. So it's something really that we will put in our comments for the FSCA to look at, please.
Thank you for that, Tia. Appreciate it. Would anyone like to raise their hand? Anyone else? Let's have a conversation. Please raise your hand. MJ, you come through.
Thanks, Atulia. I'm trying my best to keep my hand down to give other colleagues an opportunity, but I will grab the opportunity since there isn't any other hands.
If no one has their hand up, grab it. Don't
Yeah,
worry.
no, so thanks, guys. Appreciate that. I just quickly want to go back to two questions. The one is the customer records, and I just want to perhaps sketch a practical maybe example that we need to consider in this regard, because I'm not sure, and I think it was Murray that made this comment around we have to find the balance between the compliance burden versus the costs versus the benefits that we eventually want to achieve. So customer A decides to apply for a personal loan on Monday, and he goes to his bank and together with all of his documents, which subject to all of the requirements stipulated in various other pieces of legislation, may require him to bring along approximately 10, perhaps 12 documents. Now he goes in on Thursday and he decides that he wants to amend his will. That may cause him to have to bring in another 4 to 5 sets of documents. Saturday, he decides to go in to withdraw a very big sum from one of his investment products, which may require him to bring another 8 to 9 sets of documents. The next week, Tuesday, he decides he wants to buy a new car and he goes in to apply or goes online to apply for a VAF product. And he has to upload most probably approximately again 10 or 12 sets of documents, all required, let's not forget this, under existing legislative prescriptions. So none of us are asking for documents, unnecessarily. We're literally asking in 90% of instances everything that's been prescribed by various pieces of legislation. Guys, I'm not sure, and maybe I'm missing the point here. So please just help me to better understand. But now I'm counting all of these documents. I'm totalizing all of it. Okay, I end up within a single week or two with approximately 50 sets of documents that one customer has brought in. Then we mustn't forget that there are things like where we have divided systems and where we have Chinese walls for very, very good reasons. So we hold customer data on one platform that doesn't necessarily talk to another platform because it's a Chinese wall that separate the different divisions. So now you're double counting this customer because this customer could have done business with the one division and he could have done business with the other division. I just don't understand the concept of how the number of records is going to give me insights into accuracy and completeness. Because the other thing is, it also depends on you're not necessarily going to use all of the information in the record. So you may end up with one record that you only use one tiny piece of information from. Think about a source return. So we have to, for example, in certain instances, record the source registration number, and that customer could potentially bring, his whole submission that he made to source, but we'll only use that one tiny bit of information. So this one for me, I think, and I'm trying to think to Lorraine's point, what else can we perhaps collect to try and get the same purpose that we want to address? But I think in this one, I'm just asking if we can just please think about practically how it works in practice, because what it will eventually mean is every single system within a bank, and I mean in some of our banks we have got more than 200 systems, will have to be updated to now cater for a little block that says count the number of records and complete it in there. So that's my one question. And then just going back to the system downtime one, I think the question that was asked around that one's also quite valid. And maybe an example. So let's say a system is up and running and then Eskom cuts out. And now, because of the electricity that's gone down, the system goes down because it's waiting for the generator to kick in. And I think that's where that question is also coming from. So is that example then counted as a system downtime? Because it's not really system downtime, it's just switching from one energy source to another energy source to keep the system running. Thanks, Atuli.
Thank you, MJ. Lorraine, I know once I see your face, you're ready to take a step. Please come through.
Yes. So just on the last question, so for me, like I said, downtime is when the system is not available. And if that switch over from Eskom to the generator, if that takes half an hour, in some instances, we've seen that the issues can slip in with that switch over from from the grid to the generators. If that takes a certain amount of time, and the system is not available during that specific time, it will be regarded as a downtime incident and it must be recorded. For us here, it's whether it was up and running and available for the customer. Even if it was down for 1 minute, if a customer is unable to access its banking app or unable to make a payment because the system was not available during that switch over, then it's regarded as downtime and it should be counted, and we should have need to assess that information. Then on the issue of customer related records, we take the point that further clarity is required. Um, Marguerite, I don't think the intention is to actually count all of the records that you've referred to. That was never the intention. So we will definitely provide some more clarity as to what type of records we're referring to. But I think it is important that if you have a customer and your customer access different products within your institution, accessing it through different channels, there must be some form of check, ultimate check as well, to see, what is the most up-to-date data that you have of the customer. So if you access and record that customer data, let's say his contact details, at 3 different access entry points, and it differs, how do you know what is the most up-to-date information? And what information are you going to use for that customer? How do you ensure that you're actually able to contact your customer? If you record different contact details across the different channels, but you don't check what is the most up-to-date information. So I think, like, I agree, there should be a balance. And we just need to find that balance. But definitely, please raise it, and we will provide some more clarity as to what is meant by customer-related records. And then, why do we need the number? So obviously, we are using this data to calculate the risk of an entity. So we have very specific measurements in place. So it is a quantitative measurement in place. And so what we want to assess here is how often do you actually assess your customer data to make sure that it's accurate and up to date. And then we also need to determine the proportionality. In order to do the proportionality, we need to understand how many records have you assessed versus the number of the total number of records that you have. So that's how you measure the proportionality of records. And it's also how we also distinguish between big organizations and small organizations, because small organizations have much less customers than big ones. And we need to see what is that proportionality relative to the size of the business. But we acknowledge and we hear, and we'll definitely give attention to this aspect. Thank you.
Thank you. MJ, all sorted?
Yep. Thank you so much, Atuli. We'll include per Lorraine's request the comments in our submission. Thank you so much, ladies. Thanks, Lorraine.
Thank you. Erica, please come through.
Sorry, it's on the same subject, and I just want to, it's more a statement than a question. If we're all using different matrix of what data quality, what's related information. So, for example, what MJ just said about using 200 different systems and. So if they give you that we've done 30 million transactions a month or 300 million transactions, and I come along and I use a different matrix and I say I've used 10 million, you're not measuring apples with apples if we can't define what those are. So my concern would be, and it's more a statement, that people should be using the same matrix for that data. Otherwise, it's not really going to be too relevant from your perspective. And so I do think we need to rethink that, but we will mention that.
Thank you, Erica. Yes, please do mention it. Ryan, please come through. I've allowed your mic. Please unmute.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Hi, Ryan. You sound very far from your mic.
Sorry, can you hear me better now?
A bit, yes.
Okay. Sorry, I did ask some of the questions in the Q&A, and when you said it answered, but just to confirm if there would be, so let's say we have submitted comments via the form, the Microsoft form thing, but if we like go through the return again and have any other questions or stuff like that, will there be somewhere where we can ask these questions, like an email address or something, or for like the small FSPs, will you guys provide guidance to them maybe while they completing it, just in case they make a mistake, or even while they're completing it, they make a mistake. So I know you said you guys aren't gonna, like, if they make a mistake or answer something incorrectly, you're gonna come at them. You'll obviously discuss it with them. So will there be a process like that, um, leading up to the pilot, or would that be like what the pilots um, will be kind of used for?
Thanks, Ryan. Juanita, I can see you're ready. Please continue.
Yes, maybe just to clarify also my responses to you, Ryan. So Um, if they, so what I said is, if you still have anything that is unclear or uncertain, or you feel we need to put in a description or one or other guideline when completing the return, that you can highlight for us in your comments when you submit it now at the end of November. We won't be taking questions directly into the inbox because we might just not get to it before the end of November due to the magnitude of the comments that we might be getting. We do have a few targeted engagements where we were requested to engage individually with entities, which we also made available from the beginning. It was in the explanatory webinar as well, where we could address some questions. But after this consultation process, the piloting is going to start, and that's going to take another 8 months. If you're part of the piloting, and I would really want to invite everyone again to think about it, whether you have the capacity to take part in it or not. But if you do, please send an email to the designated inbox. Then we will be walking with you this journey on to see how to complete the return and where there could be any obstacles. After the consultation process ends at the end of November, however, we are still going to work through all the comments, and we are going to publish a response document. That will probably be done by end of January, February, where we do give comments, and that's what I refer to in one of my answers to you, where we do give comments on things that were highlighted in the comments process and where we give guidance. Even after that document and after the pilot, then only will the final return be published. Anything that changed will be highlighted if needed, because there was a comment also, will we let you know if anything changes from someone else or if we need supporting documents. All of that will be made clear prior to your first submission. And then in this entire process, so if you want to ask questions and it is somewhere in this process, you are more than welcome then to send us those questions. And we'll, or set up a meeting with us and we'll discuss it with you. But we just might not get to all the questions before the end of November. So you can highlight them to us, you can ask them now. You can wait for the comments document and see what our responses to it is, or you can after that engage with us again. And then, like Murray indicated, we are still working on our rollout plan and how we will engage with the different sectors, the different size entities in the sectors, and how we will guide you. There's a lot of training that needs to take place and a lot of assistance that need to be given before we do final submissions, and now we actually try and analyze those submissions. And I think that also touches on what Marilee and even Lorraine mentioned earlier. We know there's going to be a period of a best effort submission, and we need to see progress from a best effort submission, but we do know that there's going to be issues there. You might have concerns, you might not have all the data, and that is also when you will engage with your supervisory teams responsible for your entity and discuss those concerns with them. So it's definitely not going to be one that you're going to start submitting and we're analyzing from September next year. It's not going to be that after today and after these sessions, you won't hear from us again until we announce the date of the first submission, and then you'll submit. And it's not going to be that any actions will be taken immediately against you for not submitting a complete or an accurate return. You'll have to complete every field, otherwise you won't be able to submit. But it won't be a case like that. I also saw there was a comment about what if it's not applicable to us. If there's a question or a section that's not applicable to you, but it hasn't been grayed out, then you'll complete those cells with a 0 so that you're still able to submit, because it still has an influence on your risk rating and shows us that in that area you are a lower risk, or it might not be applicable to you. And in that process, we are refining the return. So please don't expect the worst. I see that Marley raised her hand. Marley, do you want to come in here?
Thank you, Nita. Yeah, I think you gave a comprehensive explanation. I want to, and it speaks to a little bit to what the previous commentator said. So we understand 100% that the best data that we will get is if everybody understands the question in the same manner and then report in the same manner. And I think it's a road that we also walked with the insurers when they started completing the conduct of business returns, that they still are. And I think there are still, even to this day, some questions that we have as to whether the insurers are reporting in the same manner, or whether they're adding different figures to it. And the idea is to work towards a report that works perfectly in future, but it is going to take time. And at any point you can make use of that inbox and send questions. But I think realize that this period of comments and then the piloting period next year is probably crucial for us in ironing out the first few problems. And then even later on, we can talk about how we roll it out and how you start doing your reporting. I remember with the conduct of business returns, at some point we even had insurers, if they were struggling to submit certain parts of the return, they were reporting to us in terms of plans as to how they are going to obtain it, how long it's going to take them. So we were not unreasonable in expecting the information there and then immediately, and not listening to the challenges of the industry. And specifically, I want to put your concerns at ease about the smaller entities. We hear this over and over. We do need to provide a lot of guidance to the smaller entities to be able to complete this report. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Ryan, you sorted?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to ask, the inbox you guys are talking about, is it that FACA Omni risk return comments at fsca.co.za? Is that the email address where we can send
Yes.
stuff? Okay. And then about the piloting, is it something we can ask you to be part of now, or is that something more for like next year? Because I see it says to be confirmed on the one document. Or is that just details of when it's going to be rolled out?
Yes, so to be confirmed is the exact data.
Oh, okay.
But since we want to start with
You sound far, Juanita. I'm not sure if it's just me.
Sorry, might be my voice getting tired. Sorry. Can you hear me now a little bit better?
Perfectly. Yeah.
Yes, so I actually answered a query in the inbox this morning in that regard. The sooner you volunteer, the better, because we would like to finalize the list by end of December, because we want to be ready in next year to start with it. And we need to see if we need to approach people if we don't have enough volunteers. So please volunteer as soon as possible.
And who can be part of the pilot? Is it just FSPs or the compliance officers?
Any of the entities that need to submit the return.
Okay, so okay, only the FSPs can really be part of it. Okay.
Yeah, well, some of the entities we regulate aren't FSPs in the sense of registered with. That's why I'm carefully answering you, Ryan.
No.
Any of the entities that need to submit.
No, I was just asking because I work for a compliance company, so I'm assuming we can't be part of it. It would have to be our clients more.
Well, you can ask to get a mandate from one of your clients to be part of it.
Okay.
If you're going to submit on their behalf, then this would relate to you too, but we do need to get their permission that you have the mandate, because you're going to need access to their systems and information to be able to be part of the pilot.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks,
Ryan. Thank you very much, Juanita. MJ, please come through.
Thanks, Atuli. I just want to go back to the comment that Erica made around data standards, still speaking about customer records, because I think the other thing we need to keep in mind here, Erica's comment is very valid, and we mustn't forget that whatever data standards are adopted by regulated entities are adopted as part of their overall operating models and strategies. So I think we also need to take care that we don't, from a regulator perspective, start to prescribe aspects that will determine the strategies and operating models of regulated entities to such an extent that potential risk may then have to be transferred, to the entity that prescribed such. So that's something that we'll also have to balance with the compliance burden, the costs, and the benefits that we ultimately want to achieve. Just a comment there, not so much a question. And then if I may perhaps just make two proposals, I think something that will be helpful, and this was actually a point that was raised in the very first session, and it's a very valid point. There seems to be, respectfully so, an assumption that everybody that has either attended the sessions or are involved with the risk return, RDR, etc., has been around for many, many years. That's not the case. There's a lot of people that are new to this industry. There are people that have attended these meetings that don't know about the work that was done on RDR, for example. So I don't know, but it may perhaps be helpful if the FSCA could or want to consider doing something like a frequently asked questionnaire that actually pinpoints all of the questions that's been raised in the successions and the answers provided thereto, and that then being available in future as part of the return for whenever somebody new comes into the industry, because there's nothing as dangerous as assuming that somebody must know everything or must know what sits behind something that's being asked. So just a proposal there. And then also if we could perhaps please ask, and I do understand why this was not the case with the previous comments matrix issued on the Omni CBR, but if we could perhaps ask that for the comments matrix to be issued on the Omni risk return, that those comments be detailed again to each of the questions raised by the different regulated entities. And the reason why we ask for that as regulated entities is not to create a lot of work for the FSCA, please, colleagues, but we don't have all the insights that you do. So you approach this discussion with one very specific mindset, knowing what you ultimately want to achieve. We are not privy to those discussions that you have. We are not privy to all of your thought processes. So, in providing us with detailed comments per comment raised by each individual regulated entity, it helps us to start to better understand what it is that we ultimately have to achieve as a collective. So just perhaps a question, request, comment there as well. And then the last one, and this is a last question from my side. I would just like to understand, to what extent will the FSCA's system be able to interface with the likes of your information regulator, your prudential authority, your SOP, so that we can at some point get to a point where, and I'm now specifically thinking of all of the information that's being requested from a data breach perspective. That information lies within the mandate and are very, very thoroughly investigated, talking from personal experience, by the information regulator. So one of the things that we really have to try and achieve is to lessen the duplication that currently exists in the system, because it brings about extreme capacity resource constraints. It brings about costs, which is a reality. I know we don't want to talk about it, but guys, eventually somebody has to pay for this. Okay. So I would just like to understand, to what extent is the FSCA working towards having its system integrating with the other regulators so that we can get to a point where some of these returns will be pre-populated with information, and we can then, as regulated entities, just correct it if it's not fully correct, or we could add on, etc. And that's the last one from my side. Thanks, Atuli. And then again, thank you very much. Erica also said it, but these were very, very good sessions. Thanks.
Thank you, MJ. Lorraine, please come through.
Thank you. So, thank you for the comments on the response or the request on the response document. We will definitely consider and see how we can provide the information as per the request, given our very tight timelines. But let's see, we will get back to you on that. On the integration of our systems, yes. So obviously, we are trying, and that is one of our priorities, is to avoid duplication and to avoid industry having to submit duplicated information to various regulatory authorities. So we have, for example, already integrated with Department of Home Affairs. We've provided for integration with the CIPC, and that is also just to validate some of the information that we get from our regulated entities, and that's also part of our data quality audits and checks that we perform. We will be working on integration with the PA system, or the system used by the Prudential Authority. However, we are only building the system now, so it has the capability to integrate. But how that integration will take place, what the requirements will be relating to that integration, that is only going to take place a bit later. So yes, the intention is to provide for that integration and to collect the data from a central point to avoid duplication. But we may not be able to do that immediately when we go live with the system. It may take some time. Where there are other opportunities, definitely the intention is to engage and see how that integration or sharing of information can take place. So that's definitely something that we will be considering. I think what would be very helpful for us is to see, especially the information, I think, Margaret, you referred to the information regulator. Maybe if we can just get an understanding, and it will be easier for you to provide that information than us going out and trying to find it, is how much does the information that we're requesting relating to data breaches differ from what you're currently providing to the information regulator? So if you could just give us an indication in your responses, that would be helpful, because then we can see how we can bring alignment to ensure alignment, so that when we integrate, we are able to actually extract the relevant data, because if there's no alignment, integration is not going to assist. So that would be helpful. And it will then also just give us an understanding as to whether that alignment actually meets our needs, because sometimes the data that's being provided to the other regulator does not necessarily align to what our needs are. And remember, we look at it from a different perspective than what the information regulator is looking at it. So giving us context to what's being provided and giving us the information how we can bring about alignment, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lorraine, and thank you, MJ, as well, for those questions. As we bring this final session of round 2 to a close, we would love to sincerely thank you for walking this journey with us. If you haven't already, please explore the published documents on the FSCA website, which includes the communication, the explanatory memo, as well as the draft return. These will remain important as we move forward. Thank you again for your time, energy, and insight. We look forward to building a return process that works for all of us. Have a great day and a great week ahead. If you are in Johannesburg, please do keep warm. Okay. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Cheers.
Bye.